I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, the editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council Incorporated. Welcome back to the show, Danielle.
Hello, Jim.
It's very interesting watching business television about 3 major boards in Canada have rejected diversifying their boards right now. The company that owns Tim Hortons, Bell, which is CTV, and of course a big cell phone company, and Dollarama have all rejected proposals to diversify their boards of directors, which at this moment are all male. Any shock about them rejecting the idea of having women on the board or maybe transgendered people?
Unfortunately, it's a cultural thing that's very ingrained. I think that I've written about this on the blog several times. It's basically, I don't think anyone sets out with the goal of being exclusive or not being open to diversity, but in reality, their habits and practices just reinforce it. So the most repugnant argument I've heard is people say, well, you know, you're going to make us take substandard candidates because you want them to be female or of a certain ethnic origin or certain sexual orientation. And of course, that's not what anyone is advocating. The point is that half the population is female. More than half the business schools in the country are populated by female students and graduates. The representation in the workforce is routinely strong in certain sectors and areas and administrative and supportive roles, and very few make it through to those sort of plum spots. And plum spots, like boards, are very plum spots. They are jobs that are given often to friends or colleagues or people that the C-suite likes or knows or hangs with. And a lot of times they want more yes people than anything with a real, other alternative view or critical thinking. Very often people are paid, I think of Pamela Walwyn getting $400,000 a year to be on the Gluskin Chef Board. Maybe that was for diversity, but I would suggest that it was totally just to be there in name and not for any scrutiny that she could offer of their business model. So it's really complicated, Jim. I think generally speaking, people today should be open to the interest in diversification of their business groups wherever the candidates can be found, because, it's sort of embarrassing in this day and age for anyone to have no at least sexual diversity. I mean, because that's a 50-50 split in the population, surely you can find some candidates. But the flip side of that is something that has really kind of upset me during this whole campaign run in the United States, the presidential campaign of late. So the fact that Hillary Clinton is the first presumptive nominee of a major party in an election in the United States, well, certainly in Canada, too, is no better, right? As you know, we had Kim
Campbell.
Thanks, Kim Campbell by default at one point, but never elected to the highest office in the land. Anyway, but people have been saying of late, and I've heard some women advance the argument that if you're a feminist, you have to vote for Hillary Clinton to become the first president of America. And I would submit that the change that's needed in the world is much more about thinking and worldview and systems and solutions than it is about color or sex. So although I'm all for finding, diversity and promoting people who deserve opportunity, I'm not for this kind of carte blanche endorsement of anyone because of their own physical attributes. And, I personally don't like Hillary Clinton as an incoming president. Would I love to see a woman president? Absolutely. But do I think she's a great candidate for the change needed? Absolutely not.
Well, of course, when the alternative is Donald Trump, I think Americans are going to be going to the polls, holding their noses with their eyes shut. And, because, again, they're going to be hoping for the best, but as they say, hope is not a plan.
Yeah, but just to finish off on the board issue, the spots that are given out, there's that 2020 campaign, which is the website you can go to and you can read all about, and the Tim Hortons case is on there on the homepage. You can read all about the initiatives that are being taken and how a lot of companies are actually signing on. Proactive companies are signing on to this goal of having at least 20% female representation on their boards by 2020. So we got 4 more years, not quite, to accomplish this goal. And it'll take a lot more effort because we're still woefully underrepresented. And the thing is, I think the institutions lack when they don't have that other part of the human experience represented, because not that men and women necessarily think any particular way, but the experience that they bring is, sort of half of the human equation. So the men's are just as legitimate and the female are just as legitimate in their own experience and take on things. And I think that strength is made from the two.
Well, exactly. Perhaps men aren't as familiar as women are with how hard it is to reach things at a certain height, perhaps, because women generally are shorter than men.
Well, there's one, sure.
Just product placement. There's a difference in eye height.
Yeah, and also I find, like, when it comes to life-work balance, I think that when you had a traditional model of men who were the breadwinners and with wives at home caring for children, then you had a greater concentration of work hours for the men and perhaps after work schmoozing and after work board work and that sort of thing, which was possible when you had a parent who was prepared to be absent from the home and one who was prepared to be home all the time. But in a lot of working women scenarios, they have a spouse that's working as well. And so you can't have that same model work well when you're trying to parent and have a career. And so I think that it's the board structure itself, the way that meetings are organized, the expectation of socializing around the board. I think that when you get more women on, it becomes a more balanced, perhaps evolved idea of how that can take place and still be, entirely effective. But when it's just 1 or 2 women, they are automatically trying to act like, quote, the men. And as I say, it may be a completely inappropriate or completely unmanageable model for them if they have a working spouse or don't want to be the absent parent that's always away till 7 at night. So I think, as I say, when you get a more equilibrium, I think that you are more likely to have a more balanced work-life perspective for the company, for the management, and for the employees. And I think that's all positive.
What about those phone calls you get where they say, can we talk to the head of the household?
And then you say, which issue do you mean? Don't you find in different houses it's a different person that you want to speak to for depending on the topic? Well,
yes, I always defer the IT issues to my wife, but not if it comes to something that involves coding because I've got a degree in it.
So, there
you go. But she's the one who likes to hook up stuff. Just something as simple as that. And if it comes to shopping, I know about electronics and the rest of it. Like I said, it's a team effort. So when they say head of the household, I always say, well, you're going to have to wait until both of us are home.
There you go.
Because it depends on the question.
Right.
Danielle, the Canadian housing market, of course, in Toronto and Vancouver, absolutely hyper beyond all belief with the price rise in Vancouver, 35% in 1 year. Toronto, under 20%, but still just astounding. Well, finally, the Bank of Canada apparently is paying attention to it. Stephen Polos, the head of the Bank of Canada, saying, don't buy a house expecting appreciation. He said the Vancouver and Toronto housing markets are at risk of price gains being highly unstable. And finally, a statement from the Bank of Canada, the Canadian financial system can survive a housing crash. Well, all those things I thought were apparent, but I guess we have to have somebody in an ivory tower finally notice that there are little problems out in the lake surrounding that tower. Yeah,
and as I was writing on the blog today about the credit crater spreading under Canadian asset markets, it's always the same. We've seen this so many times repeated through history. You saw a similar pattern in the late 80s when Japan was going through it. Japan was the product provider to the world in the 80s, just as China was in the 2000s. And they amassed this huge mass of reserves and savings in their economy, which then flowed into asset markets, which then bubbled over, which sent foreign capital fleeing, and it went to other cities in the world and was buying up real estate like crazy everywhere. And the same thing happened with our real estate markets then in America and in Canada. They both went to, extreme high valuations and then spent the next decade mean reverting, right? So this is the type of pattern. Now in Canada so far since 2005, we've had pretty much straight up. And it's always, people will say, what's the big deal? If someone buys a house and they're going to live in it, and they overpay, 10 years later, it's still a good investment. Those are not the people that we're concerned about. The problem is always in the extent of leverage of the participants. And that's why that chart today, which comes from the Bank of Canada, showing the proportion of insured mortgages with high loan-to-income ratios, the fact that in all the major centers in Canada, there's 30% and more have a 450% loan to their income ratio. So that's one thing. That means that as interest rates go up, their payments become incredibly unaffordable. That's the first thing, because that's a ridiculous multiple of your income to be paying just for a mortgage, never mind all the other expenses that come with home ownership and all the other life costs that people have. So that's the first thing. It's become lunatic fringe in terms of financial risk. And the second thing is that the bulk of those are all insured mortgages, insured by taxpayers in Canada, Jim, insured by you and me and the others who have been, paying tax and hoping that we get investment in productive things that make our economy strong. No, in this case, for the last, certainly since 2008 when things went really off the rails. If you think about it, the Canadian economy was on fire with the commodities bubble, then tanked in 2008 and rebounded quickly on the QE stimulants that drove commodity prices higher for a period of time. But since we are now in the secular bear phase of the commodity cycle, which means that commodity prices trend lower and flat for a decade or more after the prior bubble period, that's when you realize that what picked up the baton again in 2008 for our economy was all the consumer spending based on abusive credit, based on loans that were underwritten by the government. And everybody involved thinks this is all wonderful while it's going up, but they don't appreciate, they're not paid, let's say, to see the risk. And as Stephen Polo said, every bubble has a crater under it, every single one. And that's going to be the case in this one. And so the people who are buying houses they can't afford to pay for, that's going to be a problem. The people who are maybe can afford them right now, but if they lose their job, they're snookered. That's going to be a problem. All the people that are owning debt on their homes well into their 50s, 60s, and 70s today, that's a problem. So it's at the margin. It's all these people, and the ones that are thinking they're getting into so-called investments by borrowing obscene amounts of money and paying obscene prices. Essentially, free-flowing credit, if you think about it this way, it means indiscriminate buyers are everywhere. So it makes everyone dumb money. That whole school of thought or mythology that there's smart money and dumb money in markets and that smart money, wastes and picks up value. Well, the spread of credit and underwriting by governments, which has made it available and readily pushed through the banking system, has made this really enlarged pool of dumb money today. And dumb in the sense of indiscriminate and oblivious to risk. And so those are the ones that cause the damage to the broader economy when they falter and can't pay.
And of course, with the huge price rise in Toronto and Vancouver, when the market does stop climbing, it probably will crash just as fast as it went up, won't it?
Well, pricing collapses can happen in two ways. Typically, what happens is they either plateau and go nowhere for a decade or more, which allows, real prices to deflate over time. Or they have what we saw in 1980 and 90, which was a precipitous decline, 20% and more up front and 40% in some of the hot areas, and then a flat line before it starts to gradually recover a few years later. So it's very difficult to know, what kind of form it will take. but we know that unsustainable pricing just never endures, and that's the law of the land.
Well, the last recession I thought was caused deliberately by governments because real estate was going up 15% a year, and that's unsustainable. So why not let the economic system crash to cool it down? And I think it was a harsh measurement, of course, because a lot of us lost jobs and never got them back. But of course, no government would ever admit to doing that.
Well, they never want to bring on the crash because they don't want that blood spatter on them. But the fact is that by allowing the bubble to billow, by not having any prudent controls and lending and leverage and limiting, putting back in place just basic common sense things like a 20% required down payment. This whole idea that government's underwriting debt to allow people to borrow up to $1 million with next to no skin in the game is not helpful. People think that sounds like progress and it's helping everyone get on the property ladder, but the payback period is so expensive afterwards. And the cleanup phase and the loss to real values of other people that weren't doing the speculative things, at the end of the day you end up in a deficit. It looks real sexy and busy for a while, and then the implosion takes you back to before you were, even on that ascending trend. So that's the problem. Everyone wants the up, but no one wants to deal with the down. And yet, the only thing a valuable risk manager can actually do, and if you're advising children or family members or friends or anything, the only valuable thing you can actually do is advise on how to control risk. Not on, telling them how to double down and gamble. They could do that at any casino. But if you want to tell them how to control their personal risk, then that means save more, put down more, borrow less, pay debt off quickly. Don't take out debt that's, 300% and 400% your disposable income. That sort of thing. So, unfortunately, cooler heads are rarely prevailing in this space.
Are some people hoping for a lottery win or a win at the local casino to help fund their pension?
Well, this is the mentality, the age of impunity where all the banksters have been robbing and stealing and getting away with, huge wins, has really precipitated a whole thinking, a whole psychology through the world today of people who are, suffering from stagnant wages. The highest paying jobs have come from the finance sector. All the smartest grads are attracted there. Here's a sick little loop that I thought of the other day. The reality is that the finance sector and government underwriting of student debt enabled a bubble in the values of tuitions and prices for education in the world, especially in North America in the last decade. Because governments were underwriting credit and banks could issue it, tuitions could go up at an unsustainable clip and the people could borrow more to afford it. Now, what happens in a perverse twist is that the people that come out of university with the highest debt levels have to look for places where they can make income sufficient to repay that money. And where do you think they find those high-paying jobs? In the finance sector. Why? Because the finance sector's been the beneficiary of all this illicit behavior and unholy alliance with government, revolving doors. They've been at the funnel of the credit underwritten by taxpayers. So they get sucked back in to this very corrupt sector. And the economy in general suffers because we need innovation and intelligence in so many aspects of the world today, but so many of them are being drained back into the finance cesspool. And that's what's happening, and it's this perfect loop that we have to break out of.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park. Danielle, anything else you wanted to tell us about what was on your blog this week?
Well, there's been some excellent, inspiring things happening in sustainable energy and food. Mercedes just announced that they're going to bring out 4 different models of pure electric cars finally, including an SUV. They're going to unveil their first one at the Paris Auto Show in September. I'm very excited about that because they've been sort of monkeying around with hybrid powertrains a little bit in the last couple of years, but really no initiative. And these are supposed to be, you know, the leaders of auto manufacturing in the world. They're the revered leader, and they were really not catching on to the future wave for electric cars whatsoever, but now they seem to have. Now, prodded and inspired by Tesla for sure, but I think that's exciting. I remember we've owned a Mercedes SUV for probably 15 years at least. We've had a couple of them, and I remember the last time they called to say, hey, we'd like you to come to this event about our next SUVs, and I said, no, we won't be buying a Mercedes the next time you guys have no electric cars. We'll be going elsewhere. And so, you know, I think that feedback, obviously not just from me, but from a lot of customers, has prodded them to take that step. So that's exciting. And also, you know, there's some great innovation in freight farms, and that's the container growing, which we talked about before, where people are bringing food, fresh food being grown on the premises in various containers which are highly energy and water efficient. And, you know, there's like the LED technology, the recycling of the water technology. It's just massive. My son's in Germany this week, and he texted me to say, hey, Mom, you wouldn't believe there's solar and wind farms everywhere I look here. It's so inspiring, you know. So that stuff is all going on in the world. It's just slow in North America particularly, and I think that's been a function of political oppression and governance from status quo corporations. And I think that as we move forward, you know, that will become less restricting.
The robots are coming, and in China they have arrived. Apparently Adidas is shutting down all of their Chinese plants, perhaps disemploying 1 million people, moving their operations back to Germany, where all the Adidas runners will be made by robots. Is that our future?
I think robots are a future in manufacturing for a lot of things, yeah. I mean, you know, the question is who's going to buy products when robots are running all the jobs?
Exactly. I know in the trucking industry they're saying 3 to 5 million jobs will disappear in 5 years when robots start to drive our taxis and our delivery trucks.
Absolutely. Autonomous driving, I think, is going to be definitely here within the next possibly 7 to 10 years. And it'll probably be net very positive in many ways for humanity. When I see people continually texting now as I'm driving beside them, I can't wait for autonomous vehicles to come. But it is going to be a disruptor for so many things. You know, so many things from parking lots, which will be empty because people aren't going to need to drive and park, to automakers who have pumped out this, you know, trillions of ICE vehicles that are basically driving dinosaurs. There's going to be a huge shakeup of sectors and companies that people take for granted today.
Yeah, perhaps we'll see roads like we see in the car ads. Nobody else on the highway, apparently, when you drive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, of course, there will always be a market for people who like to drive as well, the sports model people.
Right, but
that's a niche.
That could be more confined to track for sport than it is for transportation.
Will we see insurance rates go down because of it?
Certainly should, yeah, and should see the incidence of fatalities and injury and all sorts of nasty things that flow from the current car system fade into the background.
And, of course, once electric cars become more popular, electric cars need virtually no maintenance. You don't have to look after oil levels. The only fluid you have to worry about is the windshield wiper.
Oh, and there was there's electric buses being made all over the world, and the numbers are just amazing that, you know, even after you pay a higher upfront cost for the electric bus, the savings over the duration of its tenure is, you know, $400,000 per bus in saved fuel and maintenance costs. So, you know, mathematically it makes perfect sense, and so that's why I think eventually even the most devout naysayer will have to capitulate.
And for people who think electric buses wouldn't have a lot of torque, the bus drivers I've talked to who've tried out the electric buses in Vancouver love them on the steep hills we have.
As soon as anybody has driven, you know, not maybe a Leaf, which is not the best made car, but anyone that's driven the best technology of electric vehicles, is quickly converted in my experience. So even though they talk and talk about why it's dumb or it shouldn't work or whatever, when they get in and experience it, most people are dumbfounded. It is just such an incredible experience.
Danielle, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward questions for the show to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.